Hey friends, what is up and welcome back to my channel. If you saw my last video, yes, I'm wearing the same clothes. Mama cannot be bothered to change her clothes to film a new video. Today I wanted to sit down and put in one video all of my favorite adult science fiction and fantasy books or series. I've been getting this question a lot because I've been branching out and reading other things. I primarily read YA and a lot of horror, but I've been reading a lot of really thick, juicy fantasy series, as well as some high-flying sci-fi series, and I wanted to sit down and talk to you guys about them today. So that if anybody ever asks me this question, they have a resource to go to. Now, my list is not necessarily extensive. I did keep it to 6 books and series because I could ramble on about all of them, and a lot of you guys have seen me talk about these before. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get started because the first one that I have to talk about is quite large. I don't know if you can hear its floppy paperback goodness, but it would be The Shadow of What Was Lost. This is the Lycanius trilogy by James Isington. This is a series that I have been told before that I was going to love, and I was like, I don't know, it seems really extensive. I mean, like, you can just see it is gigantic. I loved this series so much that I read the first one in 11 hours. I read the second one in like 10 hours, and they are over 800 pages. I'm on the third one right now and loving it, but I know I'm like dreading the end of it. Basically, it follows our main character, Davian, and he lives in a society where there are people who are limited by something called tenets, but they are able to do certain types of magic, and but like I said, they're limited. And Davian is one of the people who, after a certain age, if you are unable to create magic, you are basically drained of your ability to function and become a human. I forget what they call them. I think they call them shadows. But something exciting happens to him, but also very terrible, and he finds out he's actually an augur. Now, the reason why the tenets exist is because the augurs, who are pretty fucking powerful, decide to basically try to overthrow what was the government at the time, which is why the tenets do exist. So Davian is, finds out that he's an augur, and someone comes to him and says there's a man, a boy basically, that you need to go and find. It is very imperative. It is linked to you. You need to go and figure things out. But when he does that, he opens up a whole can of worms, and it is linked to the beginning of everything, basically. This series is very extensive. I've heard people say that if you like Brandon Sanderson, you'd really like this. And I definitely get those vibes because it's like an epic fantasy. But the thing about this that I find very different from Brandon is it's very easy to read. It's very digestible. It's not very like florally, and I'm not saying Brandon is, but I've heard people say, Brandon writes these very extensive fantasy series, and obviously this is, but I struggled zero with getting into this and following it and understanding it. And I really appreciate that about this. I think the characters are so well thought out, and you really grow to care about them. Like, I love every single character in here, although I will say don't get too attached, because this is definitely a very brutal series where people that you care about go through things. And I wouldn't say there's necessarily any trigger warnings that I can think of off the top of my head, because I do feel the need to point that out with bigger fantasy series, but this is just such a lovely, lovely series that will inevitably rip your heart out at some point, but I recommend it 100%. The next series that I have to talk about is one that I've raved about on my channel that you guys know that I love this, and it's Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. As well as our main character, Clay, and him and his friends are part of what was a traveling band. The book kind of has like a music vibe to it, like an 80s rock band kind of vibe, which is something that I really loved about it. But one day, Clay, who has settled down and started a family of his own, an old member of the band named Golden Gabe shows up and says, my daughter has gone off to war, basically. We need to get the band back together and save her. And this is one of those books, like a fantasy book, that I think it really is carried by the characters. I think the characters in here are absolutely stunning. If you followed me for any amount of time, you know that I struggle with remembering character names. It's just something that I've always been absolutely terrible at. I remember every single character in this book. I remember their names. I remember their backstories. I just fucking love them so much. And this series is very brutal, but it's definitely also one of those series where I don't want to say it's slightly predictable, but it's also feel good at the same time. Like, you just know somehow that things are going to work out because you desperately want them to work out, because you fall in love with the characters so quickly, because they're just a band of a bunch of old guys that get together to basically go save another old guy's daughter, and they're just trying to like fit in with the youths basically throughout the entire book, and it's just very funny. Like, this book made me die laughing out loud. Like, some of the characters, especially Moog is my favorite. There's just so many nods to like music and D&D. It feels like a very 80s D&D campaign, and if you're a fan of either of those things, I think you'd really like this. But like I said, I've raved about this a ton of times on my channel. I cannot recommend this enough. Everyone I know that's read it has loved it. If you've read it and didn't love it, you probably didn't tell me, because you guys know that it's just absolutely one of my very favorites. The next one that I have here is one that is very close to my heart, because once again, it's like the whole found family aspect of books that I really, really love. And for me, it had all of the elements of a great book. It has representation in it. It has blood, gore, really fucked up villains. It has, you know, just a great storyline. And that would be A Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe by Alex White. You guys know Alex wrote a fantastic series. They put their heart and soul into the characters of this book, which is one of the books that I read where I realized how important characters truly were to me. This follows primarily two main characters, Boots and Nyla. Nyla is described as a hotshot young racer. She's definitely into like the party scene and being all powerful and being like, you know, a badass babe in racing. And then it also follows Boots, who is a washed up treasure hunter, but Boots is also ex-military. She does decide to leave, and there's a big plot about like the end of their world and the end of society and the war that Boots fought in. And Nyla and Boots are kind of thrown together because they are essentially roped into saving the world together. And when they do, they actually get paired with Boots's old like army buddies, and they do not like her and she does not like them. So throughout the book, you start falling in love with these characters and watching them change. And that's what I really like about this, because I feel like Alex did a very, very good job at character growth and change. There's one character specifically in this book named Orna who goes through so much, and if you look at Alex's website, they also did short stories like precursors to these books, and one of the characters that they covered was Orna and her development, and it's phenomenal. Like, you can definitely see the character growth in all of these books, and like the story is very cool as well. And if you have heard me talk about the villain in this, her name is Mother. She is psychotic and absolutely terrifying. One of the most terrifying villains I've ever experienced. So for me, this is A+ writing, A+ characters, and one of my absolutely favorite books that I've ever read. Like, ever, ever, ever. Now, the next book I have to talk about, you guys have also heard me rave about on my channel. Now, this one has a very good amount of like Norse mythology kind of feel to it, but it is based around the Inuit people. And it definitely has like a magical realism feel at the beginning of it, but it is The Wolf and the Whale by Jordana Max Brodsky. This is a book that I randomly got from Orbit. I have since ordered my own copy because I actually sent Bunny the arc that I had of it, but it follows our main character Amat, and I'm gonna call them they because it's not really defined in the book a whole lot, because Amat is part of the Inuit people, and the men in her tribe take care of, you know, basically everything, and that is what Amat wants to do. And they definitely identify with the men. And so throughout the story, you get to kind of experience Amat trying to figure out where they fit. But when Amat does start their period, they are kind of cast aside as a woman, and that is not what they want, and they don't understand kind of like what is happening, because they are promised, like their father, to basically inherit his power, because there are animals that do, like spirit animals basically, they give them power. And this story is interesting because that's really what it follows. There's another tribe that comes to Amat's tribe, and they are harsh and horrible, and they're more of like the Western mentality than they necessarily are. But like I said, this does have a good blend of Norse mythology as well. Like, further on in the book you get to kind of experience that. But this book is one of the most brutal books I've ever read. There are animal deaths in here. There is trigger warnings for rape and things like that. But for me, this was just such a beautiful book, and I was worried that maybe I liked it so much because I grew up in Alaska, so it was kind of nice to see certain things that they talked about, or you know, like the climate that they talked about and the things they were eating and just how they lived, because I grew up in a very small village in Alaska. So for me, it was like kind of coming home. But everyone I know that has read this, aside from me, no matter where they have grown up, they've loved it. And I think it just has such a rich story to it, because like I said, it's like Inuit and Norse mythology kind of blended together, and it was just, it's so beautiful. And you're following Amat through their journey, and it's really, really heartbreaking, but it's one of the best writing styles I've ever experienced as well. I think Jordana has a very fluid, but also very like rich writing style at the same time. And this book is just absolutely fantastic. Like I said, it seems very menial. Like when you're reading it, it's just like about Amat's day-to-day life and the things that they're experiencing. But the further along that you get in the book, there's like a very hard turn where you're just like, oh my gosh, you're like head over heels, like invested in the story. And I think I read this in a day. That's how much I loved it. And like I said, I had an arc of it, ended up sending it to a friend and ordering it. So that's how you know I absolutely loved it. And I've never read anything else by Jordana, but I would definitely be interested in reading more. The next book that I have here is one that I have once again talked about on my channel. Now, I would say this is more magical realism and fantasy. It's kind of hard to describe, but it'd be the 10,000 Doors of January. I have 3 editions of this book. I'm not joking. I have a hardcover, I have my ARC, and then I have another ARC that the author actually sent me with her annotations throughout it because I absolutely loved it. Actually, I don't have my ARC anymore. I also sent that to Bunny. But this follows our main character, January, and her dad, you kind of get the vibe throughout that her dad is Indian, and he is sent to basically hunt down artifacts for the man that they live with because her mom is no longer in the picture. And January one day is given a book that sort of opens up memories and is able to transport her to different memories and to different places. And that's what the story follows, and January trying to figure out who she is and who she's working for, and, you know, the man that's taking care of her entire life, and, you know, what is her dad's backstory and what he's going through. And it's just such a beautiful book, and the characters are amazing in this. There is one character, his name is Bad. He is a dog. He is my favorite character throughout the entire book. Yes, the dog is my favorite character in this book. But it's so rich, and it's like you can tell when you read this book that she is a reader. Like, I feel like a lot of authors are obviously readers, but you can really tell that she is, because she definitely writes in a way like that. I feel like a lot of authors who read a ton or who are really invested in literature, they know what kind of audience they're writing to, and it's the type of audience that I think she is, and it's so rich and so beautiful. And if you've been wondering whether or not you should read this, you should read this. I will say it can be kind of slow, and I feel like that's the one thing that people really have an issue with, but I did not, and I absolutely loved it, and I do not like slow books. I feel like this really keeps you wanting to read, and I think that's really important. Now, the last book that I have to talk about is a book that it's a series, and I've read all 3 of them and absolutely loved them. I would say the 3rd one is my favorite, but it's The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This follows her main character, Vasya, and she lives in a small, what I'm going to assume is like Russian village. I don't know if it's ever really said or if it's just said once and you kind of run with it, but it's very cold, very desolate, like very, very, very Russian. And they believe in these little gods that basically protect certain parts of the society they live in. So like the town hall or their homes or their hearth, and you have to believe, the more you believe in them, the more powerful they are. Well, Vasya's mom dies, and Vasya's dad remarries to a woman who does not agree with that mentality. She's very like, I believe she's like Christian or Catholic or something like that. So she makes Vasya and her family stop paying tribute basically to these gods, and they start to die. And because of that, Vasya, you know, kind of lashes out, and she gets thrown into a war between 2 brothers, the god of war and the god of death. And this series, you guys, is so wonderful because Vasya is one of the most unlikable characters I've ever read. She's pig-headed, she's bratish. She also does this thing where she like puts herself in harm's way constantly. Like, there's 2 gods that are fighting, and she's like, yeah, I'm gonna do this. But she basically saves her people, and it's just so beautiful to watch her kind of go through things, because she also struggles with femininity and kind of what that means to her, and if she is a woman, if she isn't a woman, and there's like love and loss throughout this as well. And I think it's so wonderful and so rich, and it's one of those books that as you read it, you just feel cold, because it does take place in such like a cold climate, and it really puts you in the book. But hands down, one of my favorite series. This is another one that I recommend to pretty much anyone if they ask me, like a good adult fantasy series that they should read. It's just so good. It's kind of very slow, very, you know, like the world building, the character building, it takes its time, but once you're hooked, you're absolutely hooked. So I cannot recommend this enough. All right, guys, so those are all of my favorite sci-fi and fantasy series. Well, not all of them. Like I said, this isn't an exhaustive list, but as many as I thought that I would share today. If you guys want to see a part 2 of this, or maybe like my favorite, you know, something or other, let me know down below. I'd love to know what you guys would like to see, but let me know down below your favorite science fiction or fantasy fantasy series or standalone that I should get to this year. But I love you guys so much. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Hey friends, what is up, and welcome back to my channel. As you can tell from the title of today's video, we're going to be going over my Feel Good-a-thon TBR. I am incredibly excited to be participating in this. If you guys saw the announcement video, I will list that down below, as well as the TBRs from all of our other hosts. But if you guys saw the video, you will know that this is basically a build your own